Back in the 1970s, you could haul a full cooler right into a stadium. Lunchboxes clinked in the stands at baseball or football games, and nobody thought twice about it. Folks set up like it was their own picnic. Drinks on ice, sandwiches wrapped in foil. Security barely looked, and the ushers just smiled. Playgrounds were built tough in those days. You had spinning witches had contraptions. Kids flying off at dizzying speeds, and the ground below was plain concrete. No mulch, no soft rubber mats, just bruised knees and dead elbows. Parents sat on a bench knitting or chatting while the kids sorted themselves out. And somehow everyone survived. Believe it or not, high schools actually had typewriter rooms. They were official labs marked off by the school itself, where teens could practice timed essays between classes. Teachers walked past, maybe giving a nod, but it was considered normal. The clatter rolled across the hallway, and nobody called it a problem until later during the gas crisis. Odd-even rationing dictated when you could fill up based on your license plate. Folks desperate for backup stashed gasoline in milk cans, glass jugs, even old coffee tins in the garage. The smell of fuel hung heavy in the air, but at the time, it was just part of coping. After the 55 miles per hour speed limit was set, CB radios became the voice of the highway. Families cruised the interstate, while Dad chatted on the mic, calling out traffic updates about roadblocks ahead. Handles like Gear Jammer or Sugar Cookie filled the airwaves, turning long drives into a rolling community on wheels. Open toolboxes in cars weren't unusual. People rode with jumper cables between their knees or a folded map in a plastic sleeve, and it wasn't seen as strange. Strict road kit requirements came later. Back then, the idea of planning for breakdowns didn't raise alarms. It was just part of a Friday night cruise. Neighborhood block parties sometimes featured whole pigs roasting in improvised oil drum smokers. Streets filled with steam, laughter, and kids darting between tables of potato salad and deviled eggs. No permits, no catering licenses, just community. It was noisy, messy, and heartfelt. Today, regulations and ordinances would shut it down before the charcoal even lit. Airline cockpits had map drawers and logbooks in mid-flight. Passengers barely noticed because the whole cabin was already filled with the sounds of conversation and clinking trays from the rows behind. Armrests had ashtray slots, but they were just used to store coins and wrappers. The scent of vacuum-sealed meals was as much a part of flying as the sound of the engines humming outside. Neighborhood movie nights meant somebody renting a 16mm film, hanging a sheet on the garage, and telling folks to bring their own folding chairs. Families dragged lawn chairs, set up coolers, and settled in under the stars. No permits, no licensing, just popcorn popping and kids running around while the reel clattered in the dark. Snow tires came with metal studs in those days, biting right into icy roads. They tore up pavement, leaving ruts and grooves. But for many states, it was perfectly legal. The crunch of studs on asphalt was part of winter's soundtrack, even though it left the streets scarred by spring thaw. Flying coach meant hot meals, real trays. Flight attendants wheeled carts up the aisle and served pasta, sandwiches, or fruit for anyone who asked. No menu choices, no digital screens. Travelers toasted the experience at 30,000 feet as if it were a family dinner. Air travel felt like a luxury, even on the cheapest tickets. Roller rinks were filled with laughter. Trash cans lined the snack bar. Parents cheered from the bleachers. And even the DJ sometimes spun records with a pencil stuck through the center. The music mixed with disco lights as kids skated laps. Nobody called it secondhand smoke. It was just the atmosphere of a Friday night out. Laughter, neon lights, and the hum of jukebox music from corner diners. Truck parades rolled through town, tossing candy straight into the street. Kids darted between wheels and bumpers without a second thought, scrambling for gumdrops and Tootsie Rolls. Parents clapped along, smiling at the sight. Safety officers today would sound alarms, but back then it was just part of small-town fun and summer tradition. Electronics companies openly sponsored booths at county fairs, handing out free swag, stickers, buttons, and bright hats with glowing logos. Families strolled by with kids in tow, and nobody blinked. Brand mascots were everywhere, on banners, racetrack walls, even fairground rides. It was advertising at its boldest, long before privacy laws and regulations pushed it out of sight. Concerts in the 70s meant festival seating. Fans surged to the front the moment gates opened. No assigned rows, no barricades, just a sea of bodies pressing toward the stage. It was chaotic, loud, and risky, but fans called it electric. Today, tight security and designated seating have turned those wild free-for-alls into history. City buses came equipped with pull cords and metal fare boxes. Drivers often steered with one hand, calling out stops as passengers balanced grocery bags behind them. The air grew thick with chatter and engine rumble, but no one complained. It was simply the atmosphere of public transit in that era. Backyard pools often had no fences, no alarms, and no self-closing gates. Kids from the neighborhood wandered in for a swim on hot afternoons, sometimes with no adults in sight. It wasn't seen as a liability or danger, just summer fun. Today, it would bring lawsuits, insurance nightmares, and safety inspectors in a heartbeat. Chlordane was the go-to treatment for termites, sprayed heavy around house foundations. It was powerful stuff meant to last for decades, and homeowners used it liberally. Later, it was banned for health and environmental reasons. But in the 1970s, most folks only knew it as the smell of getting the job done. Dime stores sold tiny turtles in plastic bowls to eager kids, often just a few inches long. No one warned about bacteria, and children played with them right on the kitchen table. It wasn't until 1975 that the government banned the sale of turtles under 4 inches. But before that, they were everywhere. Dish soaps and laundry detergents in the 1970s were loaded with phosphates. They made water soft, dishes shine, and suds foam high, but they also fed algae blooms downstream. Back then, few thought about what drained out with the rinse water. Only the clothes looked whiter, and sinks bubbled with satisfaction. Open municipal dumps burned nightly. Trash trucks dumped the day's load. Someone struck a match, and by evening, smoke curled into the sky. Kids sometimes biked out to watch the flames, while adults shrugged it off. Recycling programs hadn't taken root yet. Burning garbage was just a city's way of managing waste. Helmets were almost unheard of for kids on bikes. If a kid showed up wearing one, he'd be teased for being overcautious. Skinned knees, chipped teeth, and a few scars were seen as part of growing up. Safety campaigns came later. Back then, the only protection was the wind in your hair. Auto shop classes taught real grease work, but waste oil and gasoline were often dumped straight outside or into floor drains. Students drained cars into open pans and learned repair by doing, not by manual. Today, the EPA would shut it down in seconds. But then it was all part of shop class. Families often tuned up their own cars at home, changing spark plugs, checking belts, and tinkering with carburetors in the driveway. People thought factory settings robbed engines of power, so everyone had their own secret fix. Nobody blinked at the noise or the smell of exhaust. It was considered smart maintenance, not mechanical rebellion. Many families proudly displayed handmade crafts and trophies on wall shelves in the living room. Windows were left open, screens rattling in the summer breeze, and nobody worried about theft or damage. Hobbies were seen as pride, not clutter, and visitors often commented on the craftsmanship instead of raising eyebrows at the sight. Home fuse boxes weren't always replaced properly. If a fuse blew, plenty of folks simply stuck a penny behind it and screwed it back in. The lights came on, but so did the fire risk. It was the poor man's fix, whispered about as clever, though it left houses just one spark from disaster. Little league fields were lined by hand, often with chalk tossed straight from a bucket. Kids inhaled dust clouds as the lines were drawn, coughing and laughing without concern. Coaches might wipe their hands on their pants and go right back to the game. Protective masks and safety gear were unheard of. Hitchhiking wasn't just for strangers. It crept into carpools, especially during gas shortages. If someone was walking the same direction, a neighbor pulled over and said, "Hop in." It wasn't seen as risky or unusual. Sharing rides was simply practical, whether it was friends, neighbors, or complete strangers catching a lift. School field trips sometimes went straight to the heart of a factory. Kids walked within feet of stamping presses, molten metal, or conveyor belts, with little more than a teacher pointing things out. Hard hats and safety glasses weren't standard. Students wore their regular school clothes. The lessons were unforgettable, if a bit dangerous. In the 1970s, a bank teller often cashed a sizable check with nothing more than a signature and a smile. No photo ID, no electronic verification, just a familiar face behind the counter and maybe a quick glance at the account balance. It was a trust-based system that feels unimaginable in today's world of passwords and fraud alerts. Teenagers commonly worked night shifts at gas stations, diners, and corner stores, sometimes barely old enough to drive themselves there. Labor laws weren't tightly enforced, and many kids spent long hours alone handling cash, pumping fuel, or serving customers. Parents saw it as character building. When police found a teenager breaking curfew in the 1970s, the outcome was usually a stern lecture and a ride home. No citations, no paperwork, no court dates, just a verbal warning meant to scare a kid straight. Officers saw themselves as neighborhood guardians, not paper pushers. That quiet leniency is a rarity in modern policing. Sending a child to fly alone was simple. A paper ticket, a small pin with the airline's logo, and a flight attendant keeping a casual eye. No IDs, no TSA lines, no background checks. Parents waved goodbye at the gate, and kids felt a sense of adventure. It was travel on trust, not paperwork. Cleaning products in the 1970s carried few warnings, and most had no child-proof caps. Bleach, lye, ammonia, potent chemicals sat under kitchen sinks in brightly colored bottles. Parents taught caution, but accidents weren't rare. Today's bold labels and locking caps make the old packaging seem reckless, but back then it was standard household fare. Beauty salons were often filled with the scent of hairspray mixed with Fresh Pro solution and perfume. Blow dryers hummed, conversations overlapped, and everyone left with a story. The atmosphere was loud, friendly, and familiar, just another snapshot of life in the 1970s. Customers sat under giant hood dryers, while stylists sprayed clouds of lacquer and talked about TV shows, school events, or the latest neighborhood news. The irony of no talking signs hanging above the chatter wasn't lost on anyone, but it didn't stop the routine. Police cruisers had no cages, cameras, or partitions, just a single bench seat from side to side. Some departments even offered ride-alongs to curious high schoolers as part of career day. Kids sat in the front seat, the police radio buzzing beside them, watching officers make traffic stops. Today, insurance and liability alone would stop such a practice before it even started. When winter froze the lake solid, families sometimes drove their cars and trucks right onto the ice to set up for fishing or just for the fun of it. No permits, no safety ropes, no inspections, just common sense and confidence in the thickness of the ice. Pickup beds became shelters from the wind. Kids played hockey on the surface, sliding and laughing, and it was considered perfectly ordinary winter fun. Drugstores still sold glass thermometers filled with mercury and reusable glass syringes. Parents bought them, sterilized them at home by boiling water, and kept them for years in the family medicine cabinet. The idea of mercury near a child's mouth or glass syringes in a bathroom drawer didn't erase concern. It was part of how things were done. City fireworks shows were often little more than volunteers lighting fuses in a parking lot. Coffee cans were used for spent shells. A rope line might mark the edge of the viewing area, but nothing more. Spectators laid out blankets just yards away, flinching at every loud boom. Permits, professionals, and barricades came much later. In the 70s, it was all homemade spectacle. Farm kids as young as 12 or 13 regularly drove tractors and wagons on public roads during harvest season. A wave from a passing sheriff was enough approval. No escort vehicles, no hazard lights, just a determined kid hauling grain at a slow crawl. It was part of family work and rural life. Today, it might bring a ticket or raised eyebrows, but back then it was seen as a responsibility. Science class sometimes included backyard-style rocket launches, using baking soda and vinegar or sturdier metal rods for serious attempts. Goggles and safety gear weren't part of the plan. Teachers clapped when students lit fuses or flipped switches, thrilled to watch homemade crafts blast skyward. Today, risk assessments alone would shut down the entire activity. Backyard tire swings hung from frayed ropes on sturdy old trees. The dirt below was hard-packed, not soft mulch or rubber. Kids doubled up, spinning fast and crashing into one another, laughing through the bruises. Parents watched from the porch, or didn't watch at all. The rough edges of childhood were seen as valuable, even necessary. Dropping off film meant a camera clerk opened your envelope and flipped through the prints, often commenting, "Nice vacation," or "That's a good shot of the kids." Privacy wasn't part of the deal. Strangers handled every photo from beach trips to birthday parties. It was accepted, it was expected. Digital wasn't even imagined yet. Steering wheel spinners, those one-handed knobs bolted onto the rim, were everywhere on family cars. Folks loved how they made tight turns effortless, especially backing into driveways or parking lots. You could buy one at the gas station and install it yourself. They could jam or spin wildly if mishandled, but convenience outweighed concern. Many county roads, especially rural ones, wound along cliffs and sharp curves with no guardrails. A single yellow sign might be the only warning. Drivers learned to slow down by feel, not by enforcement. Accidents happened, but the roads stayed the same. Today, it might seem shocking. Then, it was just how country driving worked. Shop class sometimes included casting molten aluminum into sand molds. Students in sneakers and t-shirts poured liquid metal, sparks flying, with little more than a nod of caution from the teacher. Protective shields, gloves, or goggles weren't mandatory. Students learned real-world skills, though at risks no modern safety code would allow. Teenagers interested in science could order chemistry glassware by mail flasks, burners, condensers, with no questions asked. It was sold as educational equipment for school projects or science fairs. Parents rarely hesitated, even knowing it meant kids might experiment with real reactions at home. That kind of hands-off trust feels almost unimaginable today. Traveling vendors drove vans through neighborhoods, offering services like knife sharpening or appliance repair right at the curb. Housewives passed out their kitchen blades while chatting casually, and sparks flew from the grinder. Payment was in small bills, no paperwork, no appointment. It was a quiet service that faded fast, but in the 70s, it was a common sight. Neighborhood dogs roamed freely. They followed kids to school, chased bikes in the afternoon, or napped near the ball field. Collars and leashes were optional. Neighbors knew every dog by name, and even strays felt like they belonged. It was a carefree time before leash laws and liability turned it all into a concern. On cold nights, many homes turned to kerosene heaters for warmth, sometimes in rooms with little ventilation. Windows were barely cracked open. The smell hung in the air, but it took the chill off. Parents warned kids not to touch the hot grates, and that was the extent of the safety instructions. And yet, somehow, everyone made it through the winter. Today, fire marshals and safety inspectors would recoil at the risk. But back then, vending machines stood in restaurants, motels, and bowling alleys, glowing with neon logos and full of toys, candy, or even tiny souvenirs. A kid with a handful of quarters could pull the lever and get a prize. No questions asked. Nobody checked ages or worried about liability. By the 80s, tighter rules came in. But in the 70s, they blended right into everyday life. Asbestos was everywhere: ceiling tiles, floor panels, insulation wrap, even stage curtains in schools and auditoriums. Nobody gave a second thought to the dust floating in the air. Custodians swept it up with bare hands. Entire generations spent their school years surrounded by it. No warning labels, no signs, just part of the background. A phone book landed on every doorstep, big as a brick, listing names, addresses, and phone numbers of everyone in town. Privacy wasn't part of the conversation. It was considered a convenience. If you wanted to call a stranger or drop by, you just flipped the pages, and there they were, plain and public. That level of access seems shocking today. The long lunch was more than a break. It was a business tradition. Executives lingered over steaks and conversations for hours, closing deals with a handshake instead of a signature. By the time the check arrived, the afternoon was nearly over. Today, it might raise eyebrows or get flagged by HR, but back then, it was just called networking. Roadside fireworks stands popped up every summer, stocked with bottle rockets, sparklers, and colorful fountains. Kids wandered up with coins saved from mowing lawns or collecting bottles, and walked away with bags of excitement. Sellers rarely asked questions, just smiled and made change. By sundown, neighborhoods lit up with bangs and flickers from every direction. It was noisy, dazzling, and a little dangerous, but part of summer's thrill. Sneaking friends into drive-ins in the trunk was half the adventure. Teens folded into tight spaces, whispering not to cough or giggle while the car rolled past the ticket booth. Attendants knew it happened. Most just shrugged and looked the other way. Once inside, the trunk popped open and out spilled a crowd ready for popcorn, soda, and the glow of a double feature. Blankets, radios, and bug spray completed the setup. It was more than a movie night. It was a ritual. And just like that, another chapter of yesterday closes full of freedom, flaws, and unforgettable stories.